For today's discussion, I want to focus my attention on the potential benefits and risks of caffeine consumption in regards to sports performance and or recovery. More specifically, I wanted to answer the question whether there is a type of athlete that would benefit more from consuming caffeine pre-competition and how it affects that athlete at the cellular and physiological level. Part of the reason why I chose this topic is because I work at a high school where a lot of adolescent athletes and students partake in consuming caffeine towards the end of the day just to get through practice, whether it's due to a lack of energy, a lack of sleep, or they just rely on caffeine consumption as a daily ritual to get them through competition. According to Shearer and Graham and the meta-analysis that they conducted in 2014, caffeine is the number one consumed psychopharmaceutical worldwide. But more specifically, for my age population, they determined that the average consumption of an adolescent in North America is 100 milligrams of caffeine per day. So there's been committees such as the NCAA and the IOC that have either banned or limited the amount of caffeine that can be consumed by an athlete on a daily basis before competition in order to level out the playing field, because they do recognize caffeine as a sports performance enhancer. So how does it improve sports performance, and what specifically does it do to the body to help improve the sports performance and give individuals an edge over their competition? Ruxton in 2008 determined that consuming caffeine can increase free fatty oxidation and therefore prolonging the amount of period of time that an individual can partake in exercise. So to put that in simplest terms, the body has three sources of energy, and that's fat, protein, and carbohydrates. And in exercising muscle, glucose is the energy source for that specific contracting muscle. And by increasing free fatty oxidation, the muscle can bypass the need for glucose, and therefore the body will start using fat as an energy source, which would benefit endurance athletes or athletes that partake in some kind of activity lasting more than 30 minutes. Furthermore, Shearer and Graham in 2014 also determined that consuming caffeine could improve sports performance in a number of activities ranging from as little as 1 minute up to more than 90 minutes. Therefore, there's a range and evidence supporting that caffeine does in fact improve sports performance. However, the endurance athlete would benefit a little bit more than a high intensity athlete would, and that is it's shared to us by Shearer and Graham as they reviewed a number of different studies, and in one of the studies that they reviewed and met all the criteria of the meta-analysis, they determined that recreational soccer and rugby players ran up to 30% more during one of their matches. Therefore, indirectly, the caffeine consumption did improve sports performance in regards, and more specifically, to their ability to maintain energy throughout an extended period of time. In addition to sports performance, I wanted to touch base on how it may affect recovery. I currently work in Moreno Valley, where it is a desert, and during the summer, the average temperature could range anywhere from 95 to 100 degrees. Football is going 2 times a day. Cross country is training for preseason. Therefore, a warm climate is a huge climate factor that I have to deal with, and I wanted to answer and shed some light on how caffeine consumption can affect hydration levels and status in a warm climate. Ruxton in 2008 determined that caffeine is a diuretic, therefore meaning that an individual would be theorized to assume a greater volume of fluid after consuming caffeine. In addition to that, Ruxton also determined that caffeine consumption can limit and inhibit the ability to reabsorb sodium, magnesium, and calcium, which are 3 main electrolytes that are lost in sweat. Therefore, if I have a football player who is going through 2 practices a day, early in the morning, later in the afternoon, in the middle of the summer, I would strongly encourage for for that individual to reduce caffeine consumption due to the fact that it could cause some kind of dehydration, and therefore it could lead to some kind of heat illness, starting with heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and then medical emergency and heat stroke. However, although that may be the theorized, Millard Stafford and colleagues performed a study and determined that a warm climate does not, in fact, uh, change how caffeine consumption affects hydration status. Their study was done on 16 highly trained cyclists in an environment that was 90 degrees and 60% humidity. Although the cyclists and the test subjects were a little bit highly trained in comparison to the athlete that I typically deal with, it presents some data and some scientific backing to the fact that caffeine consumption actually doesn't necessarily affect the hydration levels of athletes. Furthermore, Millard Stafford and her colleagues did determine that caffeine consumption, or caffeine and a carbohydrate drink, did in fact keep an individual hydrated as well as a sports drink, a mass-produced sports drink. Therefore, to answer the questions, if one's going to consume caffeine, the risk of dehydration isn't as great as once thought, as long as that individual is providing themselves with adequate fluids in regards to the guidelines that have been set forth by other committees and bodies of organization. And as far as sports performance, caffeine does in fact improve sports performance. One other mechanism that it improves sports performance in is it increases the amount of calcium that's within the cells of the muscle, and therefore can increase the muscular contraction force. However, this is very dependent on climate, on the muscle type, the muscle fiber type, and a number of other factors. However, Shearer and Graham determined that the slow twitch fibers compared to the fast twitch fibers would benefit more from caffeine consumption and that increase of calcium at the cellular level. Therefore, although high-intensity athletes such as football players, basketball players, maybe sprinters may potentially benefit from caffeine consumption, it's pretty set in stone and determined by these studies that I've shared with you that endurance athletes, or athletes that depend on the slower twitch fibers, would benefit more from caffeine consumption. I hope that sheds some light on a few things, and it helps answer the questions whether caffeine really does reduce hydration levels, or if the sports performance improvement and recovery really is attributed to caffeine consumption. The last thing I want to mention is, just like anything else, too much of anything is bad for you. Therefore, consuming a high number of caffeine, or a high amount of caffeine, would not do you very good. Therefore, be aware of how much caffeine consumption is being done. And thank you, and hopefully that answers some of your questions.